Hello, friends. I can see that 80% of my viewers don't subscribe while watching my videos. Please hit that subscribe button, give this video a like, and press the bell icon for notifications. And tell me in the comments, which cities are you watching from? I love hearing from all of you around the world. Today, I'm bringing you the third story in my true Alaskan horror series. This happened in the cursed village of Portlock, a place that still sends chills down the spines of anyone brave enough to speak its name. The research vessel Northern Discovery cut through the icy waters of Cook Inlet, its engines humming against the September wind. Dr. James Mitchell from Toronto adjusted his thick-rimmed glasses, squinting at the coordinates on his tablet. The marine biologist had spent months planning this expedition to the abandoned settlement of Portlock. "Are you absolutely certain about this location?" asked Dr. Catherine Wells, her British accent crisp in the cold air. The anthropologist pulled her coat tighter as she studied the desolate shoreline ahead. "The GPS coordinates are exact," James replied, his breath forming small clouds. "Portlock, Alaska. Population 0 since 1950. Standing beside them, photographer David Chun from Sydney checked his camera equipment for the third time. "My grandfather used to tell stories about places like this, settlements that just vanished overnight." The fourth member of their team, Dr. Anna Kowalski from Warsaw, remained silent, her pale blue eyes fixed on the approaching coastline. As a paranormal researcher, she had investigated dozens of abandoned places, but something about Portlock felt different. Wrong. Captain Rodriguez, a weathered fisherman from Anchorage, maneuvered the boat toward the rocky shore. "I'll give you folks exactly 72 hours. He called out, his voice tight with anxiety. "Not a minute longer. This place, it has a reputation." "What kind of reputation?" Catherine asked, her scientific curiosity overriding her caution. The captain's knuckles whitened as he gripped the wheel. "The kind that keeps grown men awake at night, even 70 years later." The abandoned cannery loomed before them like a skeleton against the gray sky. Rusted metal buildings stretched along the shoreline, their broken windows staring out like hollow eyes. Wooden structures, once painted white, had turned a sickly gray, their boards warped and splitting. "According to my research," Catherine said, consulting her notes, Portlock was established in the 1920s as a fishing village. By 1949, the entire population had fled. No official explanation was ever given. James began setting up his equipment near the old dock. The marine ecosystem here should be fascinating, isolated, undisturbed for decades. But as he lowered his first sample into the dark water, something felt wrong. The water was too still, too quiet. No fish, no seabirds, no signs of life at all. David started photographing the buildings, his camera clicking rhythmically. Through his lens, he noticed something odd. Scratch marks, deep gouges in the wooden walls, as if something with massive claws had tried to tear its way inside. "These markings," he called out, "they're on every building, always around the doors and windows." Anna approached one of the larger gouges, running her fingers along the splintered wood. The scratches were easily 8 feet off the ground, made by something with incredible strength. "These weren't made by bears," she whispered. "How can you be sure?" James asked, looking up from his samples. "Bears don't hunt in coordinated packs, and they don't stalk humans for sport." As evening approached, the team made camp in what had once been the town's general store. The building offered some protection from the wind, though the broken windows did little to keep out the cold. Catherine spread her research materials across a makeshift table. "I've been studying the few surviving accounts from Portlock's final days. The stories are disturbing." "Tell us," Anna said, settling down with a cup of hot coffee. "In 1947, a fisherman named Tom Henderson disappeared. His boat was found drifting empty, with massive claw marks along the hull. 3 weeks later, his body washed ashore." Catherine paused, swallowing hard. The coroner's report described injuries unlike anything he'd ever seen. Bones crushed, flesh torn, as if something had played with him before killing him. James shifted uncomfortably. Could have been a bear attack. That's what everyone thought, until more people started vanishing. Always the same pattern. Boats found empty, bodies discovered weeks later, if at all. And always, there were witnesses who spoke of seeing something in the woods. Something that walked on two legs, but wasn't human. David looked up from his camera. What did they call it? The locals had different names, but most just called it the Stalker. They said it was intelligent, patient, hunting humans like a predator studying its prey. That night, sleep came fitfully. Anna lay in her sleeping bag, listening to the wind howl through the broken windows. Sometime after midnight, she heard it. Footsteps. Heavy, deliberate, circling the building. She held her breath, straining to listen. The steps were too large to be human, too purposeful to be an animal. They moved with intelligence, testing the doors, checking the windows. "Do you hear that?" whispered Catherine from across the room. "Yes," Anna breathed. "Don't move." The footsteps stopped directly outside the main entrance. For long minutes, nothing. Then came a new sound, low and guttural, like breathing but wrong somehow. Too deep, too controlled. David's camera clicked softly in the darkness. He had activated the night vision mode, capturing whatever was outside. Through the viewfinder, he saw a shadow against the doorframe. Massive, upright, with eyes that reflected the camera's infrared like burning coals. The thing outside seemed to sense the camera. The breathing stopped. Then slowly, deliberately, came 3 distinct knocks on the door. Knock, knock, knock. James grabbed his flashlight, his hand shaking as he switched it on. The beam cut through the darkness, illuminating the door. The knocking came again, this time more insistent. "Maybe it's Captain Rodriguez," he whispered hopefully. "The captain won't return until Thursday." Anna replied, her voice barely audible. "And besides, look at the door." The heavy wooden door was beginning to bow inward with each knock, as if something with incredible strength was testing its limits. Dust rained down from the frame, and they could hear the metal hinges beginning to groan. Catherine pulled out her phone, trying to get a signal, but found nothing. They were completely cut off from the outside world. The knocking stopped as suddenly as it had begun. The silence that followed was somehow worse than the sound had been. David checked his camera display, scrolling through the images he'd captured. His blood ran cold. In frame after frame, the shadow outside had been growing larger, closer, as if whatever it was had been studying them through the lens. "We need to leave," he whispered. "Right now. The boat won't return until Thursday." Catherine reminded him. "Then we call for emergency evacuation." "With what signal?" Anna asked, holding up her dead phone. They were trapped in an abandoned village with something that had been hunting humans for over 70 years. The rest of the night passed in terrifying silence. Every creak of the building, every gust of wind, sent their hearts racing. But whatever had been outside seemed to have moved on, leaving them to wonder if it had truly been there at all. Dawn brought no comfort. As James ventured outside to check his equipment, he discovered that their supplies had been disturbed. Food containers had been opened, their contents scattered, but not eaten. It was as if something had been searching, investigating, learning about them. "This is deliberate," Anna observed, studying the mess. "It's trying to understand us, our habits, our weaknesses." Catherine found something even more disturbing. In the soft mud near their campsite, she discovered tracks. Footprints unlike anything in the scientific literature. Human-like, but enormous, with claw marks at the tips of each toe. "These are fresh," she said, measuring them with a ruler. "Made some time after the rain stopped, around 3 a.m. The prints formed a perfect circle around their building, as if their visitor had been patiently walking the perimeter, studying their every move. David began photographing the tracks when his camera suddenly malfunctioned. The display showed static, broken images, as if something was interfering with the electronics. The equipment failure. James muttered, checking his own devices. "It's systematic. Everything electronic is being affected." "By what?" Catherine demanded. Anna had a theory she didn't want to voice. In her years of paranormal research, She'd encountered entities that could manipulate electromagnetic fields, but those were usually spirits, ghosts, not physical creatures that left tracks and knocked on doors. By the second day, their situation had become desperate. The radio equipment they'd brought for emergencies was completely dead. James's marine biology samples had been contaminated by some unknown substance, rendering his research useless. But it was the psychological pressure that affected them most. The constant feeling of being watched, studied, hunted. Catherine discovered more historical records in an old filing cabinet, documents that had been left behind during the evacuation. One report, dated March 15th, 1949, made her blood freeze. The Henderson boys saw it again last night. Creature standing in the tree line, watching our house. Mary won't let the children outside anymore. Tom says we should leave while we still can. The thing, it's getting bolder. Yesterday, it came right up to the Kowalski cabin during broad daylight. Just stood there, looking in the windows. We're not dealing with an animal. This thing, it thinks. Another entry, from just weeks before the final evacuation. Found Jenkins this morning. What was left of him? The creature didn't just kill him. It arranged the body, like it was sending us a message. We're leaving tomorrow. All of us. This place belongs to IT now. That afternoon, while David was photographing the old cannery, he made a discovery that changed everything. In the basement of the main processing plant, hidden behind decades of rust and decay, he found them. Bodies. Not the remains from the 1940s, but fresh corpses. Hikers, researchers, adventurers who had come to Portlock in recent years, drawn by the mystery, never to leave. They were arranged in a specific pattern, a ritual display that spoke of intelligence, purpose, and something far more sinister than simple predation. We have to get out of here. David whispered into his camera, documenting everything. This thing, it's still here, still hunting, and we're next. But as he turned to leave the basement, he found his exit blocked. Standing in the doorway, silhouetted against the dim light from above, was a figure that defied description. Tall as a man, but broader, covered in coarse dark hair, with eyes that held an intelligence both ancient and malevolent. The stalker had found him. David raised his camera, finger on the shutter, capturing what might be the last photographs anyone would ever see. The creature didn't attack, didn't move, just stood there, studying him with those burning eyes. Then slowly, deliberately, it smiled. David had never seen anything more terrifying in his life. The expression was almost human, but wrong in every possible way. A predator's smile, full of promise and threat. The camera flash went off, illuminating the basement in stark white light. When David's vision cleared, the creature was gone. But he could hear it moving above. Heavy footsteps crossing the floor, heading toward the building where his friends were waiting. David burst from the cannery, running faster than he'd ever run in his life. Behind him, he could hear the creature's footsteps, not hurrying, not chasing, just following with patient inevitability. Anna, Catherine, James, he screamed as he reached their camp. It's coming. His friends emerged from the building, taking one look at his terror-stricken face and understanding immediately that their worst fears had come true. The footsteps were getting closer, accompanied now by that horrible breathing sound they'd heard the night before. The boat. James gasped. We have to signal for the boat. But Captain Rodriguez wouldn't return for another day, and their radio was dead. Anna grabbed her research bag, pulling out an emergency flare gun. It was their only weapon against something that had been killing humans for over 70 years. The creature emerged from the tree line, moving with deliberate slowness, savoring their fear. In the daylight, they could see it clearly for the first time. It stood nearly 8 feet tall, covered in dark matted fur, with arms that hung almost to its knees. Its face was a nightmare fusion of human and animal, intelligent eyes set in features that had never been meant to think, to plan, to hunt with purpose. What do you want? Catherine called out, her scientific mind still trying to understand, to categorize, to explain. The creature tilted its head, studying her question. Then, in a voice like gravel and wind, it spoke. To understand. The words were barely recognizable, formed by a throat not meant for human speech, but the meaning was clear. It had been studying them, learning from them, adding to its knowledge of human behavior and weakness. And now, it was ready to add them to its collection. Anna raised the flare gun, her hands shaking but her aim steady. "Stay back or I'll fire." The creature laughed, a sound like breaking glass, and continued its approach. David was still photographing, documenting everything, knowing that if they didn't survive, at least the evidence might be found someday. The camera, Anna suddenly realized. It doesn't like the camera flash. David understood immediately. He began taking rapid-fire photographs, the strobe effect causing the creature to pause, to shield its eyes, to step back. "Keep shooting," James yelled, grabbing his own phone, adding its camera flash to the barrage of light. The creature snarled, backing away from the strobing lights, but not retreating. It was learning, adapting, finding ways to overcome this new obstacle. Then, from somewhere far out on the water, came the sound they'd all been praying for. A boat engine. Captain Rodriguez had returned early, drawn perhaps by some instinct, some knowledge that his passengers were in deadly danger. The creature heard the boat too. Its head snapped toward the sound, calculating, weighing its options. For a moment that lasted forever, predator and prey stared at each other, both knowing that the hunt was nearing its end. Then the creature smiled that horrible smile again, and spoke once more. "Next time." It turned and loped back into the forest, moving with impossible speed, disappearing among the trees as if it had never been there at all. Captain Rodriguez found them huddled together on the beach, shaking, traumatized, but alive. "We have to leave. Now," Anna gasped as they climbed aboard the boat. The captain didn't argue. He'd seen their faces, recognized the look of people who had encountered something beyond human understanding. As the boat pulled away from shore, David looked back at Portlock through his camera lens, reviewing the photographs he'd taken in the basement. In the final image, taken just before his escape, something else was visible in the background. More bodies, dozens of them, arranged in that same ritual pattern, and standing among them, watching through the camera lens with those burning eyes. The Stalker. It had let them go this time, but Portlock would always be its hunting ground, and it would always be waiting, learning, understanding, preparing for the next group of curious humans who dared to disturb its domain. Today, 75 years after the original evacuation, Portlock remains abandoned. The Alaskan government has classified it as an environmental hazard, off-limits to civilians. But sometimes, fishing boats passing through Cook Inlet report seeing lights in the abandoned buildings, hearing sounds that carry across the water on foggy nights. And every few years, adventurous hikers or researchers disappear in the area, their equipment found scattered along the shoreline, the fate known only to something that still walks among the ruins, still hunts in the shadow of the mountains, still understands more about human nature than any human should ever know. The research team's footage and photographs were classified by the authorities, but David Chin managed to save copies before the government seized their evidence. Those images, grainy and disturbing, remain the only proof that the Stalker of Portlock is not just a legend, but a living nightmare that continues to hunt, to learn, and to wait for the next curious souls brave enough to venture into its domain. If you ever find yourself in Alaska, and someone offers to take you to explore an abandoned village called Portlock, remember this story. Remember that some places are abandoned for reasons that go far beyond economics or natural disasters. Some places are abandoned because they belong to something else, something that has been waiting patiently for decades, studying, learning, understanding. And some secrets are better left buried in the Alaskan wilderness, where they can't follow you home, where they can't learn where you live, where you sleep, where you feel safe. Because the Stalker of Portlock is always watching, always learning, and always hungry for new understanding. That's the end of today's story, friends. If this gave you chills, if you're looking over your shoulder right now, then please hit that subscribe button and ring the bell for notifications. Share this video with anyone brave enough to listen, and let me know in the comments what you think really happened at Portlock. Are you brave enough to visit such a place? Have you ever encountered something that defied explanation? Tell me your stories. I read every comment, and who knows, your experience might become the next story in my true horror series. Until next time, sleep well And remember, some things are better left undisturbed. The autumn of 2019 brought more than just seasonal change to Alaska's remote Denali mountain range. It brought whispers, legends, and a terror so profound that even the most experienced researchers would question their sanity. This is the story of what lies beneath the frozen earth, and why some secrets should remain buried forever. Dr. Jonathan Rivers had spent 15 years studying geological anomalies across the Canadian Arctic. His reputation for uncovering the impossible had earned him respect in academic circles from Vancouver to Vienna. But nothing, absolutely nothing, had prepared him for what he would discover in the shadow of North America's highest peak. The invitation came through official channels. A joint research initiative between the United States Geological Survey and the Canadian National Research Council. The mission seemed straightforward: investigate unusual seismic readings beneath Denali National Park. What they didn't tell him in the briefing documents was that these readings had been occurring for over 70 years. Rivers arrived at the Denali Research Facility on October 10th, greeted by biting winds and a landscape that seemed to stretch endlessly toward the horizon. The facility itself was modest, a collection of prefabricated buildings connected by covered walkways, designed to withstand the brutal Alaskan winters. His colleague, Dr. Patricia Woods, had arrived 2 days earlier. A brilliant geophysicist from Cambridge University, Patricia had made her name studying underground formations in the most remote corners of the Earth. She had worked in the depths of the Sahara, the Australian outback, and the frozen expanses of Antarctica. Her experience with deep Earth phenomena was unmatched, but even she seemed unsettled by their current assignment. "Jonathan," she said, greeting him at the facility in trance, "there's something you need to see before we begin the official survey work." She led him through corridors lined with monitoring equipment and computer terminals. The hum of machinery filled the air, punctuated by the occasional beeping of data collection devices. But underneath it all, Rivers could swear he heard something else, a low-frequency vibration that seemed to emanate from the Earth itself. "Have you been experiencing any unusual sensations since your arrival?" he asked Patricia as they walked. She paused, her hand on the door to the main laboratory. "You feel it too, don't you? That constant underlying presence, like something enormous, is breathing far beneath our feet." The laboratory was a testament to modern scientific equipment: seismic monitors, ground-penetrating radar systems, electromagnetic field detectors, every instrument needed to peer deep into the Earth's crust. But it was the wall-mounted display screens that caught Rivers' attention immediately. Dozens of monitors showed real-time data from sensors placed throughout the mountain range. Seismic activity, temperature readings, magnetic field variations, all displaying patterns that defied conventional geological understanding. "Look at this," Patricia said, pointing to a seismic reading from 3 days prior. "This isn't typical tectonic activity. The vibrations are too regular, too purposeful. It's almost like a heartbeat." Rivers finished, studying the rhythmic spikes on the display. Dr. Heinrich Müller, a geologist from the University of Munich, joined them in the laboratory. Heinrich had spent the last decade studying unusual formations across the European Alps and had been specifically requested for this assignment due to his expertise in underground structures. "Gentlemen, lady," Heinrich said in his precise German-accented English, "I have been reviewing the historical data since my arrival yesterday. What we are observing here is not merely unusual, it is unprecedented." He activated a large display screen showing a timeline stretching back to 1947. The first recorded anomalies occurred shortly after World War II ended. Military aircraft conducting routine flights over the region reported radio interference and compass deviations, initially dismissed as equipment malfunctions. Rivers examined the data more closely, but the reports continued. Indeed, hunters and hikers began reporting strange lights emanating from deep crevasses. Indigenous communities in the region started avoiding certain areas entirely, claiming the land itself had become corrupted. Patricia pulled up additional files on her computer terminal. "The missing persons reports are what concern me most. Over the past 70 years, 47 people have vanished in this specific region. No bodies recovered, no evidence of their fate. They simply disappeared. The first night at the facility passed without major incident, though Rivers found sleep difficult. The low-frequency vibrations he had noticed seemed to intensify after sunset, creating a subtle but persistent resonance that penetrated his dreams. When he finally dozed, his sleep was filled with visions of vast underground spaces and shadows that moved with purpose through impossible darkness. He woke at 3:17 a.m. to the sound of his room's emergency alert system activating. Red lights flashed as an automated voice announced, "Seismic event detected. All personnel report to primary laboratory immediately." Rivers dressed quickly and made his way through the facility's corridors, finding Patricia and Heinrich already at their stations, frantically analyzing incoming data. "What's the magnitude?" he asked, taking his position at the monitoring console. "That's just it," Patricia replied, her face pale in the glow of the computer screens. There was no earthquake, no tectonic shift, but every sensor in a 5-mile radius registered a massive disturbance, originating from approximately 2 miles beneath the surface. Heinrich pointed to a 3-dimensional mapping display showing the underground topology of the region. "The disturbance seems centered on this area," he said, highlighting a section southeast of their current position. "But look at these formations." Rivers studied the underground imaging data. Most mountain ranges showed predictable geological structures, layered rock formations, mineral deposits, underground water systems. But the area Heinrich had highlighted showed something entirely different. A void, perfectly geometric, sitting like an impossibly large bubble in the solid rock. "That can't be natural," Rivers said, adjusting the imaging parameters to get a clear view. "Precisely my conclusion," Heinrich agreed. "The dimensions are too perfect, too deliberate. If I didn't know better, I would say it was constructed." Over the following days, the team expanded their investigation. They brought in additional equipment, more sensitive instruments capable of penetrating deeper into the Earth's crust. Each new reading confirmed their growing suspicions. Something massive and artificial lay buried beneath the Denali mountain range. Dr. Victoria Ashford, a structural engineer from Oxford University, arrived on October 18th to assist with analyzing the underground formations. Victoria had designed some of Europe's most ambitious underground construction projects and possessed an encyclopedic knowledge of subterranean architecture throughout history. "The proportions are remarkable," she said, studying the latest imaging data. "If these readings are accurate, we're looking at a structure approximately 600 meters at its base, rising to a height of nearly 400 meters. The mathematical precision is astounding." Rivers found himself staring at the data for hours at a time, trying to comprehend the implications. Who could have built something like this? And when? The depth suggests it's been there for millennia. It was Patricia who made the connection that changed everything. While reviewing historical archives, she discovered a series of classified military documents from 1952. The files, recently declassified through Freedom of Information requests, detailed Operation Deep Freeze, a covert military investigation into unusual phenomena in the Alaskan wilderness. "Listen to this," she said, reading from one of the reports. "Ground-penetrating radar has identified a large artificial structure buried approximately 3.2 kilometers beneath the surface. Structure appears to be pyramidal in shape, composed of unknown materials. Recommend immediate investigation and potential excavation." Heinrich looked up from his own research. What was the outcome of their investigation? Patricia continued reading. 3 separate military expeditions were sent to investigate. The first team reported unusual radio interference and equipment malfunctions, but completed their initial survey. The second team never reported back. The third team was found dead at their campsite, apparently having died in their sleep with no signs of violence or environmental exposure. And then, Rivers asked, though he suspected he already knew the answer. The operation was terminated. The area was classified as a restricted military zone, and all research was suspended indefinitely. According to these documents, the military has been monitoring the site ever since, but from a safe distance. Victoria studied the declassified photographs included in the files. These images show excavation equipment, drilling apparatus. They actually attempted to reach the structure. The photographs revealed a major industrial operation. Massive drilling rigs, construction vehicles, temporary housing facilities for what must have been hundreds of workers. All of it seemingly abandoned overnight. "There's something else," Patricia said, her voice dropping to barely above a whisper. The final report mentions that they did make contact with the structure. They managed to drill down to within 50 meters of its surface before. She trailed off, staring at the document in her hands. "Before what?" Rivers prompted. "Before the drilling equipment began receiving radio transmissions from inside the structure itself. Transmissions in multiple languages, some of which linguistic experts couldn't identify. The final transmission, recorded just hours before the operation was abandoned, was a single word repeated in perfect English. Welcome." The room fell silent except for the constant hum of monitoring equipment. Each team member absorbed the implications of what they had just learned. They were not the first to discover the underground structure, but they might be the first to survive investigating it. That evening, as the team reviewed their options, the facility's communication array picked up the first transmission. It came through at exactly 11:47 p.m., cutting through the static of routine radio traffic like a blade through silk. The voice was clear, unnaturally clear considering it was supposedly originating from 2 miles underground. It spoke in English, with an accent that seemed to shift and change with each word, sometimes American, sometimes British, sometimes carrying inflections from languages that predated modern civilization. "Dr. Rivers, Dr. Woods, Dr. Mueller, Dr. Ashford, we have been waiting for you to arrive. The time for descent has finally come." Rivers felt his blood turn to ice. The voice knew their names, knew they were there. But more disturbing was the familiarity of the voice itself. It sounded like his own voice, speaking words he had never said. Patricia's hand shook as she attempted to respond through the radio system. "This is the Denali Research Facility. Please identify yourself and your location." The response came immediately, now in Patricia's own voice, with her precise Cambridge pronunciation. "Identity is fluid in the deep places, Dr. Woods. Location is meaningless when space itself bends to accommodate ancient geometries. Come to us, come down to us, join the others who have answered our call." Heinrich crossed himself, muttering a prayer in German. Victoria simply stared at the radio equipment as if it had transformed into a venomous snake. Rivers made the decision that would seal their fate. Despite every rational instinct screaming at him to evacuate the facility immediately, despite the obvious danger, despite the fate of previous investigators, his scientific curiosity proved stronger than his survival instinct. "We're going down there," he announced to the team. "Whatever's sending these transmissions, whatever that structure actually is, we need to see it firsthand. This could be the most significant archaeological discovery in human history." The others looked at him as if he had lost his mind. Perhaps he had. Victoria was the first to speak. "Jonathan, the military classified this site for a reason. People have died investigating that structure. Entire teams have vanished without a trace. Which is exactly why we need to document what we find," Rivers replied. "If we don't investigate properly, if we don't gather scientific evidence, the truth will remain buried forever." Patricia, despite her obvious fear, began nodding slowly. "He's right. This is what we came here for. This is why they assembled this team." Heinrich remained skeptical. "And if we suffer the same fate as the previous investigators?" "Then at least we'll have tried," Rivers said. "But we'll take precautions. Full documentation at every step. Constant communication with the surface. Emergency protocols in place." What none of them knew, what they couldn't have known, was that every word of their planning session was being heard by something that dwelt in the depths below, something that had been waiting patiently for decades for the right combination of scientific curiosity and human arrogance to bring fresh souls within its reach. The preparations took 3 days. Equipment checks, safety protocols, communication systems, emergency procedures. They mapped out their descent route, using the latest ground-penetrating radar data, identifying the safest path to the underground structure. Helicopter pilot James Mackenzie from Edinburgh arrived on October 25th to provide aerial support and emergency evacuation capabilities. James had flown rescue missions in conditions that would terrify most pilots, from North Sea oil rig emergencies to mountain rescues in the Scottish Highlands. "I've read the briefing materials," James said during their planning meeting, his Scottish accent thick with concern. "Are you absolutely certain about this expedition? The flight patterns around this area have been restricted for good reason." Rivers reviewed the expedition checklist one final time. "We have backup communications, GPS tracking, emergency beacons, and a scheduled check-in protocol. If we don't report back within 12 hours, you extract us immediately." James nodded reluctantly. But from what I've read about previous expeditions, 12 hours might be 11 hours too long." The morning of October 26th dawned clear and cold, perfect conditions for their descent into the unknown. The team assembled their equipment, rope systems, lighting apparatus, scientific instruments, and documentation devices. Everything they would need to investigate the underground pyramid and hopefully return to tell about it. As they prepared to leave the facility, the radio system crackled to life one final time. The voice that emerged was a chorus, dozens of voices speaking in perfect unison, including voices that sounded exactly like each member of their team. "Welcome, brave explorers. We are ready to receive you. The descent begins now. Come home to us. Come home to the Black Pyramid, where all questions are answered and all searching ends forever." Rivers switched off the radio and shouldered his pack. Whatever waited below, they would face it together. What he didn't realize was that by the time they reached the underground structure, the concept of together would take on an entirely different meaning. The journey to the excavation site took 2 hours across terrain that seemed to actively resist their passage. The further they traveled from the facility, the more unstable their equipment became. Compasses spun wildly. GPS readings shifted and changed. Electronic devices displayed impossible readings. But it was the silence that disturbed them most. In a region known for its wildlife, they encountered no animals, heard no birds, saw no signs of life whatsoever. The land itself seemed to be holding its breath, waiting for something terrible to unfold. When they finally reached the coordinates that marked the entrance to the deep places, they found something that confirmed their worst fears. The military excavation site from 1952 was still there, preserved in the cold, dry climate like a monument to human hubris. Abandoned drilling equipment stood like mechanical skeletons against the mountain backdrop. Temporary buildings, their windows dark and empty, seemed to watch their approach with invisible eyes. And at the center of it all, a shaft descended into the earth, perfectly circular, disappearing into absolute darkness. Victoria examined the abandoned drilling machinery. This equipment is far more advanced than anything from 1952. They continued the excavation, probably for decades, until they finally broke through. Rivers peered down into the shaft, his flashlight beam swallowed by the impenetrable darkness below. Broke through to what? The answer came not from any member of his team, but from the shaft itself, a whisper that seemed to rise from the depths like smoke, speaking words in their own voices, welcoming them home to the Black Pyramid of Alaska. And with that whisper came the terrible understanding that they were not exploring an ancient mystery. They were walking willingly into a trap that had been waiting 70 years for them to spring. The autumn mist clung to the waters of Thomas Bay like the breath of ancient spirits, refusing to lift, refusing to reveal what horrors lay hidden beneath its ghostly veil. Captain William Morrison had sailed these treacherous Alaskan waters for 37 years, but even he felt the familiar chill of dread as his vessel, the Northern Star, approached the infamous bay that locals whispered about in hushed tones. The Bay of Death, they called it. Morrison's weathered hands gripped the ship's will tighter as he glanced at his passengers. There was Dr. Catherine Wells, a marine biologist from Vancouver, her blonde hair pulled back in a practical ponytail, her blue eyes scanning the murky waters with scientific curiosity rather than the fear she should have felt. Beside her stood James Crawford, a documentary filmmaker from London, his expensive camera equipment secured against the ship's railing, completely unaware that some ancient things, were never meant to be captured on film. The third passenger, Robert Fisher from Munich, kept checking his hiking gear obsessively. The German anthropologist had come to Alaska to study indigenous folklore, particularly the legends of the Tlingit people. He had no idea, absolutely no idea, that folklore and reality were about to collide in ways that would shatter his academic understanding of the world. "Captain Morrison," Dr. Wells called out, her voice barely audible above the groaning of the ship's engines. "The water depth readings are unusual here." Morrison nodded grimly. Thomas Bay has always been strange. The Tlingit elders, they warned me not to bring anyone here during the autumn months. Said the Kushtaka are most active when the salmon run ends. James Crawford lowered his camera, intrigued. "Kushtaka, what exactly are those?" The captain's face went pale, his knuckles white against the wheel. "Shapeshifters, Doctor. Half-human, half-otter creatures that can take any form they please. They lure people into the water, or deep into the forests, and those people, they never come back the same, if they come back at all." Robert Fisher scoffed, adjusting his wire-rimmed glasses. "Surely you don't believe in such superstitions." "Captain, these are simply cultural myths used to explain unexplained disappearances." Morrison's laugh was cold bitter. "Tell that to the prospector in 1900, Heinrich Zimmer. German fellow, much like yourself. Dr. Fisher. He came back from these forests, but he wasn't the same man who went in. Spoke of creatures with human faces, but out of bodies. Creatures that spoke to him in voices of people he knew. He died in an asylum 3 months later, clawing at his own skin, claiming the creatures were still under there, waiting to emerge." The fog grew thicker as they approached the shore, swirling around the ship like ghostly fingers, trying to pull them back to the safety of open water. The silence that fell over Thomas Bay was absolute. No bird calls, no splash of fish. Even the wind seemed to hold its breath in this cursed place. "There," Dr. Wells pointed to a narrow inlet. "We can anchor there and take the smaller boat to shore." As they prepared the inflatable boat, Morrison pulled each of them aside. His voice was urgent, desperate. "Listen to me, all of you. Whatever you hear out there, whatever calls to you, don't trust it. The Kushtaka, they can mimic any voice, any sound. They'll sound like your loved ones, your friends, even each other. And whatever you do, don't go near the water alone after dark." The shore of Thomas Bay was unlike anything they had ever experienced. The beach was covered in smooth, black stones that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. Ancient Sitka spruces towered above them, their branches twisted into unnatural shapes, as if they had been forced to grow in patterns that defied nature. James Crawford immediately began filming, his camera capturing the eerie landscape. "This is remarkable. The indigenous peoples must have created incredible stories about this place." Dr. Wells was taking water samples when she noticed something disturbing. "The mineral content here is impossible. There are elements in this water that shouldn't exist in nature." Robert Fisher was examining strange markings carved into the trees, symbols that made his academic mind reel with confusion. These weren't like any indigenous markings he had studied. They were older, far older, and they seemed to move when he wasn't looking directly at them. As afternoon turned to evening, they set up camp near the tree line. Morrison had returned to his ship, anchored safely offshore, leaving the 3 researchers to their work. But as darkness began to fall over Thomas Bay, that work was about to become something far more terrifying. The first sound came just as Dr. Wells was preparing her evening meal, a splash soft and rhythmic, like something large moving through the water. She looked toward the bay, but the fog had rolled in again, thick and impenetrable. "James," she called softly, "are you getting this on camera?" But James Crawford was nowhere to be found. His camera lay abandoned on a fallen log, still recording, pointing toward the dark water. "Robert." Dr. Wells's voice was rising with panic. "Robert, where's James?" The German anthropologist looked up from his notes, confused. "He was just here. filming the tree markings. James! James! That's when they heard it. A voice, calling from the fog, from somewhere out on the water. Catherine! Robert, help me! It was James's voice, desperate, frightened. Dr. Wells started toward the water, but Robert Fisher grabbed her arm. Wait, remember what the captain said. The Kushtaka can mimic voices. But what if it's really him? Dr. Wells whispered, her scientific mind warring with growing terror. What if he fell in? What if he's drowning? The voice came again, closer now, more urgent. Please, I'm hurt. I can't swim much longer. Against every instinct, screaming at her to stay away from the water, Dr. Wells broke free from Robert's grasp and ran toward the shore. The black stones shifted beneath her feet, seeming to move of their own accord, trying to trip her, trying to keep her from reaching the water's edge. James, she called out. Where are you? The fog parted slightly, and there, 20 yards offshore, she could see a figure treading water. It looked like James, the same height, the same build, even wearing the same jacket he had been filming in just moments before. But something was wrong, terribly wrong. The figure's movements in the water were too fluid, too graceful. No human could move like that in the frigid Alaskan waters. And its eyes, even at this distance, reflected light like an animal's. Catherine, the thing that looked like James, called. Come in, the water's not cold. It's beautiful in here. You can see everything clearly. Dr. Wells felt herself taking a step toward the water, then another. The voice was so convincing, so perfectly James's voice, but Robert Fisher's terrified shout snapped her back to reality. Catherine, no, look at its hands. She looked. The creature's hands, as it waved her closer, were webbed. Long, dark fingers connected by thick membranes, ending in claws that gleamed in the dim light. Dr. Wells stumbled backward, her heart pounding so hard she could hear it echoing in her ears. The thing in the water, the thing that was not James, let out a sound that was part laugh, part growl, part something else entirely, something that no human throat could ever produce. Then it began to change. The false James's face rippled, like water disturbed by wind. Its features flowed, shifted, rearranged themselves into something that was almost human, but not quite. The skin took on a sleek, wet appearance, and whiskers sprouted from its elongated snout. But the eyes remained terrifyingly intelligent, terrifyingly aware. You cannot run from us. It spoke, but now the voice was something between human speech and animal sound. We know your scents now. We know your voices. We know your fears. More shapes began emerging from the fog, surrounding the bay. Dozens of them, all different, all wrong. Some looked almost human. Others were clearly the otter-like creatures of Tlingit legend, but all of them had those same intelligent, hungry eyes. Robert Fisher grabbed Dr. Wells's hand, pulling her away from the water's edge. The trees. He gasped. We have to reach the forest. But as they ran toward the tree line, they discovered that escape was not going to be simple. The forest itself seemed alive, branches reaching out to snare them, roots rising from the ground to trip them. And from every shadow, from every dark space between the trees, came sounds, whispers, calls. Catherine, this way. It was James's voice again, coming from deeper in the forest. Don't trust it. Robert panted as they crashed through the undergrowth. It's not him. It can't be him. But then they heard another voice, Dr. Wells's own voice, calling from behind them. Robert, where are you going? I'm back here. I'm hurt. They turned to see a figure that looked exactly like Dr. Wells, standing near a massive spruce tree. It was perfect, every detail, right down to the small scar on her left hand from a childhood accident. The real Dr. Wells stared at her own duplicate in horror. How is this possible? The false Catherine smiled, but the smile was wrong, too wide, showing teeth that were far too sharp. We learn quickly. We adapt, we become. That's when they realized the true horror of their situation. The Kushtaka weren't just shapeshifters. They were absorbing their victims, learning everything about them, becoming perfect copies that could fool anyone. Robert Fisher pulled out his cell phone, hoping against hope for a signal, for some way to call for help. But the screen showed only static, strange patterns that hurt to look at. as if the very air around Thomas Bay interfered with technology. The boat, Dr. Wells whispered. We have to reach Morrison's boat. They began moving through the forest, trying to circle back toward the shore, but every path seemed to lead deeper into the woods. The trees grew thicker, older, more twisted, and the sounds grew louder, more diverse. Now they could hear Morrison's voice, calling from somewhere ahead. This way. I've come to rescue you. They could hear James's voice, still pleading from the water, growing more desperate, more convincing. They could hear their own voices, multiplied, echoing from every direction, creating a chorus of false calls that made it impossible to trust their own ears. Hours passed, or maybe minutes. Time seemed to flow differently in this cursed place. They found themselves in a clearing, surrounded by the twisted trees, with nowhere left to run. And there, emerging from the shadows, came the Kushtaka. They were magnificent in their horror. Some maintained almost perfect human form. Others showed their true nature, sleek, powerful bodies covered in dark fur, webbed hands and feet, faces that were disturbing mixtures of human and otter features. But all of them, had those intelligent eyes that seemed to see straight into their souls. The largest of the creatures, clearly the leader, spoke in a voice that was an unsettling combination of every voice they had heard that night. You came to study us, it said, tilting its head with predatory curiosity, to understand us, to explain us away as folklore and legend. But we are older than your legends, older than your understanding, older than your species itself. Dr. Wells found her voice, though it came out as barely a whisper. What do you want from us? The creature's laugh was like water rushing over stones. We want nothing from you. We want to obey you. You see, we have existed in these waters, these forests for millennia. But the world is changing, growing smaller, and we must change with it. Another creature, this one looking disturbingly like James Crawford, stepped forward. Your friend, the filmmaker. He had such interesting memories. Cities full of people, technologies we had never imagined, opportunities beyond these ancient waters. The horrible truth began to dawn on them. The Kushtaka weren't just killing their victims, they were replacing them, taking their memories, their identities, their entire lives. Soon, the leader continued, 3 more humans will leave Thomas Bay. Dr. Catherine Wells will return to Vancouver, continuing her marine research, but with new, different purposes. Robert Fisher will go back to Munich, but his academic papers will contain knowledge that no human university ever taught. And James Crawford, he will complete his documentary, but it will tell a very different story than the one he came here to film. Robert Fisher backed against one of the twisted trees, his mind reeling. The prospector, Heinrich Zimmer, in 1900. Ah yes, the creature smiled with too many teeth. Heinrich was one of our early attempts at integration. We were not as skilled then. The transition was imperfect. He retained too much of his original self, created conflicts in his mind. We have learned much since then about creating seamless replacements. Dr. Wells felt a strange calm settling over her, the calm of absolute hopelessness. How long has this been going on? How many people have you replaced? More than you might think, fewer than we need. Your Captain Morrison, for instance, has been one of us for 15 years. The real Morrison died in a fishing accident. We simply stepped into his life. No one ever suspected. We're very good at being human now. The revelation hit them like a physical blow. Morrison, who had warned them about the Kushtaka, who had seemed so knowledgeable about their dangers, was one of them. He had delivered them here like sheep to slaughter. The process is not unpleasant. Another creature added, this one female, beautiful in a way that was almost human, but not quite. You will simply sleep, and when you wake, you will still be you. But you will also be us. Your memories will become our memories, your skills, our skills, your lives, our lives. But Robert Fisher, driven by academic curiosity even in the face of death, had one more question. Why? Why replace humans at all? Why not simply remain here, in your ancient domain? The leader's expression grew sad, almost wistful. Because this domain is dying. Dr. Fisher, The waters grow warmer, the salmon runs grow smaller. The old magic weakens with each passing year. Soon, Thomas Bay will be just another inlet, just another tourist destination. We must adapt, or we must die. And we choose to adapt. The creatures began to close in, their movements fluid, hypnotic. Dr. Wells felt her consciousness beginning to fade, not from fear, but from something else, some influence these beings were exerting over their minds. But just as darkness began to claim her, she heard something that snapped her back to awareness. The sound of a boat engine, growing louder, approaching the shore. The Kushtaka heard it too, their heads turning in unison toward the water, their expressions changing from predatory satisfaction to something like concern. Through the fog, a spotlight cut through the darkness, and a voice, a human voice, called out across the water. "Catherine, Robert, James, if you can hear me, get to the water. Now." It was a voice none of them recognized, but it was undeniably, genuinely human. The lead Kushtaka snarled, its perfect human facade melting away to reveal something ancient and terrible. More humans, they are becoming too curious, too persistent. But the distraction was enough. Dr. Wells and Robert Fisher ran, crashing through the underbrush toward the sound of the boat engine, toward the sound of salvation. Behind them, they could hear the Kushtaka following, but something was different now. The movements were less fluid, less confident. The approaching boat seemed to weaken them somehow, or at least make them more cautious. They burst from the tree line onto the Blackstone beach, just as a Coast Guard cutter materialized from the fog, its powerful engines churning the dark water, its spotlight illuminating the nightmare scene on shore. "Jump," a voice commanded from the boat. "Jump now." Without hesitation, Dr. Wells and Robert Fisher plunged into the frigid water, swimming with desperate strength toward the rescue vessel. The cold hit them like knives, but behind them, on the shore, they could hear sounds that no human ears should ever have to endure. The Kushtaka were changing, revealing their true forms, and their rage was terrible to hear. Strong hands pulled them aboard the Coast Guard cutter, and immediately the boat began moving away from Thomas Bay at full speed. As they wrapped emergency blankets around the survivors, a young Coast Guard officer explained how they had come to be rescued. "We've been monitoring radio chatter from your research vessel," he said, "but about 6 hours ago, all communication stopped. When we tried to reach Captain Morrison, the transmissions we got back were wrong somehow. The voice was right, but the things he was saying, the way he was talking, it wasn't human." Dr. Wells looked back toward the shore, where shapes were moving in the fog, shapes that seemed to shift and flow like water given form. "What happened to James?" "Our colleague." The officer's face grew grim. "We found his body about a mile offshore. Looks like he drowned trying to swim back to the research vessel. But here's the thing. The body had been in the water for at least 12 hours, maybe more. According to your research logs, you only arrived at Thomas Bay this afternoon." The implications of this statement settled over them like a shroud. James had been dead for hours before they ever reached the bay. Everything they had experienced, every word the false James had spoken, every plea for help they had heard, had been the Kushtaka learning, adapting, becoming. As Thomas Bay disappeared into the fog behind them, Dr. Wells and Robert Fisher tried to process what they had experienced. The official Coast Guard report would list it as an accident, a tragic drowning during a research expedition. Captain Morrison and his vessel were never found, though sometimes, on clear nights, other ships reported seeing the Northern Star in the distance, always heading toward Thomas Bay, always carrying passengers who looked just a little too perfect, a little too eager to reach that cursed shore. Dr. Wells returned to Vancouver, but she never worked near the water again. Robert Fisher completed his research on indigenous folklore, but his papers now carried warnings that most academics dismissed as the traumatic fantasies of a man who had lost a colleague in a tragic accident. They never spoke publicly about what they had really experienced in Thomas Bay. Who would believe them? And more importantly, how could they be sure, absolutely sure, that everyone they met afterward was genuinely human? Because the Kushtaka had learned their faces, their voices, their memories. Somewhere out there, perfect duplicates of Dr. Catherine Wells and Dr. Robert Fisher might be living their lives, working their jobs, fooling their friends and families. The only way to know for certain would be to return to Thomas Bay, to face the creatures that lurked in its dark waters and twisted forests. But neither of them, not even in their darkest nightmares, ever wanted to see that cursed place again. Thomas Bay remains, as it always has, shrouded in fog and legend. The Tlingit elders still warn travelers to stay away, especially during the autumn months, when the salmon runs end and the Kushtaka grow hungry for something more than fish. And sometimes, on quiet nights, when the fog rolls in thick from the sea, people report hearing voices calling from water. Familiar voices, loved ones' voices, voices that sound exactly like people they know. But the wise ones, the ones who remember the old warnings, they never answer those calls. Because in Thomas Bay, the Bay of Death, not everything that speaks with a human voice is human. And some things that wear human faces have never been human at all.